Sarah Hanson-Young, welcome to the program.
Good morning, thanks for having me.
Have regional communities been shafted?
Absolutely not, and frankly, after a decade of the National Party doing everything they can to wind back the Darling-Basin Plan, to keep that over-extraction of water, particularly to those big corporate irrigators going, at the expense of actually river communities who need a healthy river. In order for those communities to be viable, the legislation that finally passed the Parliament this week is a good piece of legislation. It's a win for the environment, it's a win for the river, and it's a breakthrough for my home state in South Australia.
But for those regional communities, the concern for the Nats and farming groups is that some farmers will cash in with the water buybacks, sell their rights, their water rights, shift to the coast or the city, leaves that regional community without that industry, will also push up food and fibre prices. Is that right? Well,
I take my advice from the learned experts at agencies like the Productivity Commission on this, who say that water buybacks are the most efficient, both economically and environmentally, to deliver what we need to do, which is to put more water back in the river in order to give it a fighting chance.
But for the regional community, what's the impact there?
Well, we need to make sure that those communities are supported if there does need to be some kind of transition. But these are voluntary. But these are voluntary buybacks. So I just want to be clear. A farmer can sell their water to anyone at the moment. They can sell it to big corporate cotton. They can sell it to foreign water ownership. They can sell it to the Canadian pension funds.
But now you've got a new and very big buyer in the market.
But they can't sell it to the government to give to the environment. It's a bit ridiculous.
But now you can.
Yes.
And so
it needs to happen.
You talk about transition, what payments for regional communities?
There is a package within this reform that allows for proper assessment for the community. What does the community need? A fund by which can be used to help communities in that transition. But we have to save the river, David. We're heading into a climate crisis. Greed and self-interest has ruled the day on the management of the Murray-Darling for decades. It's time that comes to an end if we're to have a river that is living and sustainable, flowing in years to come.
Just one point of detail on what's been agreed here. One of the amendments given to the independent David Van to get this through is to allow farmers to lease back their water rather than sell their water to the government. It could even be a 12-month lease he's talking about. Is a 12-month water lease really going to save the river?
Well, I think what this has done is allowed another tool in the toolbox for the government and the environmental water holder, the Commonwealth environmental water holder, to look at if there's a particular area that needs water for the environment at that point, and there's a willing seller or somebody who's willing to lease that water, that can be done. We're at crisis point with this river. I live at the bottom end. Of course, as South Australians, we know how dire it is if you don't have enough environmental flows coming downstream. And my community, we are so worried about what this summer's going to bring. Bushfires, more heat, and the dredging of the Murray Mouth means our water supply is at risk.
Just on a political point, when you announced this deal, I think we've got it here, you held a joint news conference, a joint doorstop there with Tanya Plibersek. Now, I point this out because we don't see this very often. Greens did a few deals this year with the government on climate change and housing, and you never did this. In fact, this is the first time the Greens and Labor, as I understand it, have done a joint press conference since 2011 when Julia Gillard was in office. Whose idea was this?
Oh, look, I think this is a really wonderful image, because it shows that when people from different sides can work together, can be constructive in negotiations, that you can stand shoulder to shoulder and say, all right, here's a good outcome for everyone. We may not have gotten everything we wanted. Tanya wanted some other things. I wanted a bit more on some other things. But at the end of the day, we delivered an outcome that's good for the environment.
But the Greens will still be trying to take a seat of Sydney at the next election?
Well, of course, if you care about the environment, if you want stronger action on climate change, you want to end native forest logging, there's only one party who stands solid on that, and that's the Greens.
Look, I'm not sure if you talked about this with Tanya Plibersek, but in Parliament this coming week, the government is hoping to pass what's called its Nature Repair Market Bill. So this would give landholders tradable certificates when they agree to protect or restore a wetland, some sort of environmental space. They get a certificate they can then sell to a business. Now, where are you at on this idea?
This piece of legislation has been in a long-held Senate inquiry. We've got big concerns about this way the legislation is currently drafted, and as it's currently drafted, the Greens can't support it. The idea of allowing the protection of one part of nature, in a particular area of koala habitat, to be saved in order to justify the destruction of nature somewhere else, I mean, that's bonkers. So that's not environmental protection.
If a company's using it to offset environmental damage they're doing elsewhere, that's a red line.
That's a red line for us. I want to see the offsets gone. If the offsets go, then I'm happy to sit down with the government and talk about where we go next.
Okay, we've been talking about the other big priority for the government this week, and that's the preventative detention regime to lock back up at least some of those who've been released from immigration detention. What do the Greens think about the idea here of having a court at least decide who should be put back behind bars? Well,
look, we haven't seen any of the detail of this yet. It hasn't even been to Cabinet, first of all. And the way the government has managed this has been appalling, David. And the only reason this legislation is now being brought into the Parliament this week is because they stuffed up the first time, because they rushed it too fast. They didn't wait for the High Court reasons to be handed down. Peter Dutton said boo, and the government went to water. And the hysteria around this, the whipping up of fear, and the chief of the National Security Watchdog this morning calling it out for what it is, saying that both sides have behaved disgracefully on this, that they have whipped up fear and hysteria. Of course, the chief whipper-upper of all is Peter Dutton. Let's not pretend otherwise. He's built his entire career on this stuff, and unfortunately, the Labor Party have fallen for it.
So you won't support any sort of preventative detention regime?
Look, we are not interested in doing anything that undermines what the High Court has called on the Australian Parliament to do.
The High Court was quite clear in leaving open the prospect. It suggested the prospect, if you like, of a preventative detention regime.
Yes, well, we will look at the details, but we're worried about the first bill that went through the Parliament already.
But this one you're not opposed to necessarily?
Well, we haven't seen it, David. I mean, this is the ludicrous situation that we're in. Okay. There's no details. The government wants to ram this through the Senate in the next three or 4 days. This is knee-jerk hysteria policy making. It's a kind of a moral panic
but I'm just
that's
interested
been designed.
You're not completely ruling it out. If the coalition says what they put up is not tough enough, it sounds like...
Oh, look, we are not in any way interested in playing footsies with the Labor Party under the table on this at all. There is a race to the bottom here. This is all about making refugees and migrants a group in our community that people are afraid of. I've debated immigration policy in this country for a long time, and it's Groundhog Day. It's revolting. I think it's dangerous. I think the type of behaviour exhibited by Peter Dutton in particular and his front bench, I mean, it's a risk to social cohesion in this country.
But just to be clear though, if it would be a judge deciding that a child sex offender, for example, still poses a risk to the community, needs to be behind bars.
Well, we've always said that it should be a judge that makes the decision about immigration, how long someone is in immigration, the purposes for why they're in immigration detention. It should be a judge that decides who, the terms and the length of somebody's prison term. So we will look at the detail, but we are not prepared to simply play footsies with Labor because, even Peter Dutton is now going too far for them.
A couple of other things. Supermarkets. The Greens have won support for a Senate inquiry into the big supermarkets and alleged price gouging. What do you want to achieve here? Is this a new front for the Greens in going after the supermarkets?
Well, this is going to be a good inquiry and an important one because we know cost of living is going through the roof right now. People are finding it really tough, and in the lead up to Christmas, I think people are feeling that more than ever. The cost of people's supermarket trolley at the end of the week is becoming a really hard thing to bear week in, week out. I've been talking to parents in my electorate who are wondering whether they should even, enrol their kids in the school holiday programs. Are they going to have the ability to afford that and the Christmas lunch? I think we do need to crack down on this. This inquiry will look at the duopoly between Coles and Woolworths. It will consider price gouging. It'll consider whether the ACCC needs more powers. I hear Alan Felzout, the former ACCC chair this morning, backing this in. We do need a focus on these big corporations who take so much out of the pockets of families and Australians while raking in billions of dollars worth of profits. I mean, it's pretty sick, isn't it, that Woolworths has had $1 billion of profit this year, and yet Australians are struggling to pay their food bills.
The government, on another front, is wanting to change the laws applying to the television and streaming industry now. The anti-siphoning list, which is aimed at protecting certain certain major sporting events for free-to-air television, extending that to streaming services, and what's called the prominence provisions, so that smart TVs prominently display free-to-air platforms ahead of others. Looks like the government will need the Greens on this. So what's your position?
Well, we're not going to rubber stamp it. What we know is needed is a really root and branch overhaul of media regulation and rules. The world is different. We watch news and consume our content and media in very different ways now, and the laws are not fit for purpose. I want a full-blown inquiry, a royal commission into media ownership and regulation in this country. There's no point doing piecemeal and not actually dealing with the big issue. I want to see Australian sport free for people to be able to view on the devices by which they need to view it, and the devices they use to watch sport. I want to make sure that our Australian content rules are fit for purpose and modern. You should be able to turn on the television and see Australian content that's made by Australians for Australians in Australian accents, front and centre.
But if these changes progress that agenda, maybe not the Royal Commission you're talking about, but Australian content and free-to-air access for sport and other major events, you'd support it, wouldn't you?
We are going to look at it, but I really do worry the government and warn the government on the fact that there is a big desperate need for overhaul of media regulation, and just taking one bit is not going to fix the problem. We don't just watch television on free-to-air on the old TV set anymore. We need rules that are fit for purpose.
Final one, there have been growing calls for a Royal Commission into domestic and family violence, particularly after some terrible numbers out of your home state, South Australia. 4 women killed in the space of a week.
It was horrific.
The state government is considering a Royal Commission. What's your view?
Well, we need one, and I really do urge the South Australian government and the Premier, Peter Malinauskas, to do this. And 4 women in a week was a pretty hard statistic to bear. I was shocked by it. The South Australian community really were outraged. They were frustrated. There's been an outpouring of concern and anger, and people are looking around going, we talk about this issue, but what's really changing? That we are in the midst of a domestic violence epidemic, and in any other epidemic, you'd put all of the forces, in the bucket, the shoulder to the wheel, and you'd do something. It feels that when it's violence against women, when it's sexual assault, when it's domestic violence, it's kind of put in a too hard basket. Well, we've had enough. South Australians have had enough. Australian women have had enough, and it's time that governments took this seriously.
Look, it's an interesting point you make. If this was some other type of crime that was seeing this number of deaths.
Yes. Murders, David.
Why?
Women murdered by people that they know, men in their lives.
Why?
It's not like we don't know who these people are.
Why do you think this isn't attracting more attention and action?
I think it is a long suffering societal problem, David, and it's time that this changed. Women have had enough. Our children have had enough, and decent men in this country are sick of it too. It needs to change.
Sarah Hanson-Young, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.